With the growth in social media platforms and digital content creation, the concept of personal branding has become forefront in the marketing world. But what happens when personal branding intersects with corporate branding at organizations? How do organizations deal with the ever-growing push to give employees freedom to grow their own personal brands while still driving the brand of the company? Hey there, I'm Chris, and welcome to This Professional Life, a channel where I share my insights, strategies, and ideas around business development, as well as documenting interesting business stories that inspire my creativity. In part 2 of today's episode, I sit down with Lynette Tremblay, former Chief Operating Officer of Invest Alberta, a government agency tasked to spur on economic growth and investment into the province of Alberta. Lynette's new venture is called Demythifying Brand, a new project she is working on with her business partner Sherry Doyle on helping people build their own personal brand. They have an amazing podcast around the topic, and I wanted to get Lynette's take on personal branding and dive deep into her stance that large organizations should encourage and embrace personal brands within.
What people don't realize is that we all already have a brand, whether or not we think we do, whether or not we're even thinking about our brand, we have a brand. It's how you make people feel. It's how you show up in a room. It's how you introduce yourself to people. That's your brand. What most people think it is websites, logos, people's opinions. But really it's about who you decide to be and how you decide to show up. And if you're not thinking about that, you're putting a brand out there that you might not be intending to, or that you might not want to.
Right. And what's intriguing when we had the discussion to prep for this episode is you're taking a stance, I guess, on how large corporations define branding. And I want to dive deep into this because this is very interesting for me because I've been in many business development positions before, and it's always a struggle for brands, right? Is it the corporate brand or is it the person who's driving the BD initiatives? So you're taking a different stance where it's, I guess going against the traditional way of looking corporate branding and how that plays with personal branding. So can you explain that idea of companies encouraging, or maybe just take a step back and just explain your stance on personal branding and how that fits in a big corporation?
Okay, get ready for a rant.
Let's do it.
Well, and so it goes beyond big corporations,
Okay.
but I think they're maybe the most chronic offenders of this.
Okay.
So it's almost as though, and we've probably all experienced this. It's not. I'm not painting everybody with the same brush, but it's most common that when we join an organization or a corporation, we are asked to leave our identity and our brand at the door. And it's natural to say that we put on a team jersey, right? We've got to represent the corporation, but not, in my opinion, smart to say, wipe your name off the jersey. You no longer get to be a person or an individual. You are now, if you're a Trekkie, a part of the Borg or a cog in the wheel. I think that's a missed opportunity for companies. And I think it always was, but it is especially now because companies are moving in the direction of recognizing that people do business with people. They don't do business with corporations. Big makeup brands, big consumer brands, they're using influencers and individuals to sell their products now.
Right. And
through their stories. So this happens a lot in big corporations. I've heard from so many people where they say, well, my company is said what I can and can't put on LinkedIn, or what can and cannot be in my bio, or that I can't speak for the company. Well, news to the company, you already are. When you tell people that you work for the company, you're speaking for the company, whether they like it or not. People are part of the corporate brand. And so why not encourage that? Why not develop that? In smaller corporations, I have, a friend who's a CEO of a small corporation, small company. And he said, I don't like that, I don't like the idea that I am synonymous with the company brand. And I'm like, but you are, so get over it. and lean into it. Yeah. So use it to further develop the company brand, but also develop your own brand. Yeah. Or don't at your own peril.
I think I know the answer to this, but things have changed, to your point. I would say, really push the boundaries of traditional corporate branding, social media, digital media, and the availability for everyone to use their phone and get out there. And I think that's a big problem, right? For companies that struggle with their, and I get this a lot, well, what's our social media policy? And it is very restrictive for most companies. I don't know what you've seen in the marketplace for that.
It is. It's so interesting that companies feel this need to censor and to control people's voices. I understand you don't want your employees out there disparaging clients, the company, but if you go to that notion of we have to control what you say on social media, that's already a recognition that your employees are a representative of the brand, right? A brand ambassador. Otherwise, you wouldn't care.
Right.
So rather than and we talked in a previous episode about I'm more of a proponent of the carrot than the stick.
Yep.
Rather than beating people with a stick, saying thou shalt not speak for the company, thou shalt not say anything. Why don't you encourage and empower and home that to be a brand ambassador, in a positive way.
Right.
I understand too. Like, you can't say crazy things on social media and expect it not to affect your job.
Yeah.
So leverage social media to build your brand. And that's, I think a lot of people, social media, especially through the pandemic, and we blame the pandemic for so many things, but when we were locked up in our houses and going a little stir crazy, we would all just use social media as an outlet for our innermost thoughts that we maybe would have censored before. It's become that instantaneous think and tweet, or think and post. Right. And similarly, you've got to think about your brand. Is that who you want to show up as? Because whether it's somebody who's meeting you for the first time, an investor, a potential employer, a client, they're going to Google you. They're going to look you up on social media. So it's not just about keeping your job, or from the company's perspective, about keeping your employees in line. It's also about your brand. How do you want to show up?
Do you feel, though, that companies, to a certain extent, have a right to be a little bit more risk adverse when it comes to allowing their employees to go? And I mean, we'll dive into how they can do it, but I guess there's some recognition that if someone goes out, they are like, hey, I'm from Coca-Cola, but I also believe this. And then now the company has to deal with, okay, this is a separate person. This isn't us. This isn't our stance, right? Yeah. But like they do have those concerns, though, right?
Yeah. I mean, but here's the thing. Can you really separate who you are from what you do?
Right.
That's where I think we've been thinking about personal brand wrong all along. And even how we work. When you're going through something in your personal life, to think that you can compartmentalize that and not bring that into work is, to me, crazy. This is where we've talked about, on the culture side, building, safe and open and inclusive workspaces where you can bring your whole self to work. So on the flip side, your brand can't be separated out either. You can't be you in one aspect and then corporate you in another aspect. There's different shades of it, but there's that undercurrent of all the same. And so, yes, I think companies certainly can be wary, but I would go back to questioning their hiring practices. So are you really getting to know the person that you're hiring? Or are you maybe looking at this hiring process, in my opinion, in an antiquated way of, okay, well, they meet the checklist of criteria. We haven't bothered to get to know what motivates them and what moves them as a person.
Right.
And if their values are a fit for our company's values, if they fit the kind of culture that we're trying to build, if you do that, then you have a positive brand ambassador. And to your point, you can mitigate some of those risks through the hiring process, and then also by shaping what that looks like.
Yeah. So again, finding that good fit, right? So if you have someone that you truly know during the hiring process that does fit your culture and, sees the same or has the same values similar to the company, then to your point, you mitigate some of that, and you shouldn't have any blow up that come from that. But it does take effort, though, right?
Yep.
Like, you can't stick to how we used to hire, right? As you said, with the checklist, like, it doesn't work.
Everything has to change. So it isn't just about branding, right? Branding is an aspect of it, but yeah, absolutely. we talk about talent as the most valuable resource, but you cannot treat talent as a commodity. If it's going to be valuable, you have to invest in it. You have to spend time making sure that it's the right talent for what you want to build and nurture it.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is good because it leads into my next question. And that's where, what are some of the benefits, I guess, for large brands to begin embracing this idea of, a personal brand within the corporate umbrella? What's some of the advantages there?
Well, I think you can reach potentially a whole new clientele or series of partners that you never anticipated, because you're going to leverage off, you can get so much more runway off of somebody's personal brand than you can off of a corporate brand, because people connect with people, not with corporations. The other thing as well that I've seen is a strong personal brand can also attract talent. So if you've leveraged people in the right way and you've given them a space to grow and be empowered, and you're encouraging their personal brand, they're out there being ambassadors for your corporation, not just from a sales perspective, but also from a talent recruitment perspective. And especially people in leadership positions, other people will see that authenticity, that leadership brand, and say, I want to work for them. We've all heard the moniker the saying that people leave bosses, not jobs.
Yep.
Well, people join bosses, not jobs.
Right.
And I've had that, people say that to me in terms of who came to work for me. And I've also had the same thing. I've both left bosses and joined for bosses.
Yeah.
And I've had people follow me along different organizations, and I would do the same for a good boss. That's personal brand. Has nothing to do with the corporation.
Yeah. Well, and you brought this up in the earlier response, was about influencers, right? And how that's become a lot of go-to marketing strategy for these big brands. And you think about that concept, that's that one person who's the influencer, right? It's not like you've hired another corporation to now build out your, drive business to your brand. It's that person who built that relationship with their audience that you're relying on to sell your product through.
Yeah. And it's so much more cost effective, than like when you think about how much it costs for acquisitions, if you're selling products, to get more viewers, listeners, consumers. Well, somebody's already built that up. And if you can leverage off their credibility, because that's what this is all about, right? Their authenticity and credibility, and use them to persuade their audience then becomes your audience. And so the same thing, has happened to me in roles. I've worked in 3 different provinces, and people from my Ontario network probably didn't really think much about Alberta. But all of a sudden I was being more promoting what we were doing on social media, and somebody who was running a capital investment firm all of a sudden paid attention and came and invested in a company in Alberta.
Right.
And so would they've been looking at Alberta, would they've noticed if they hadn't had a personal connection and been at least following some of my posts? So think about how the size of your corporation, the number of people in it, and their networks that have nothing to do with your corporation, from their careers, from their volunteer work, from their personal lives, that can all be leveraged if you do it effectively.
I guess it requires leaders in big companies or big organizations to have a bit of a mindset shift then, right?
And some humility.
Well, that too.
Well, because if you think about, we've been talking about traditional thinking, right? The traditional thinking is only a certain person or certain people at a certain level are allowed to be the face of or speak for the company. And so to allow or to think about the fact that it's a team effort, even if you're not, say, putting your managers out giving big speeches, that's not what I'm talking about. And that's what people often think about when they think about branding in companies.
Right.
We're not talking about sending, your administrative assistant out to deliver a speech to a conference. We're talking about empowering them with messaging about the workplace and about themselves and the value that they bring to the workplace, but also the passion for the purpose. And recognizing that each person has potentially as much, if not more in some cases, personal brand equity
Right.
as the C-suite, well, that does require some different thinking and humility.
Well, but it's tough though for those leaders often, right? Like changes, especially if you've, I hate to use the word old school way, but
Mhm.
like if that's how business has always operated, right?
Yep.
Then it's hard for them to step out of that and say, oh no, you're right. It should be everyone else being empowered to promote the company versus I'm the head, I'm the face.
Yep.
I'm the only one that can do it, right? Like that's very difficult for a lot of leaders to do that.
Absolutely. Well, and I even think about the term leader, right? And we use that in relation to positional authority. But there are people in companies that are leaders without having that authority position.
Mm,
And they're already being leaders. They're already leveraging their brand.
yeah.
And so I think the fear comes from a lack of control. Like you talked about it just a few minutes ago, right? Well, what if the company can't control what somebody says? That's the big fear about leveraging people's personal brand and making them into ambassadors. What I've seen companies do as well is if they think about, okay, we have to get all of our people to be ambassadors, so we have to script them. They have to give them key messages and they have to go out there and say these things.
That's not authentic at all.
It's not authentic at all. And so, it's just like saying, okay, everybody has to tell everyone there's not a culture problem here.
Right.
But is there? So the fear comes from that lack of control. And I'm not about to suggest that you can or should control it, but you can hone it if you invest in it and you nurture it. And that's just lacking. I think it's lacking in a lot of organizations because they don't really understand branding, right? It's a pretty niche and unique space.
Yeah.
But that's where you can bring people in who do.
Yeah.
And what better a message to send to your employees than to bring someone in and say, we're going to help you identify who you want to be as a professional and how you want to show up and help you use your voice.
That'd be very different. Like even just you saying that, I was like, I'm trying to think of any company out there that starts with that. I don't know if they do.
I don't think I've ever heard one, but I mean, I'm hopeful.
That's why you're driving the change.
I
want to talk about your
revolution, baby.
podcast in a bit. So let's assume an organization is open to this, right?
Okay.
The leaders are convinced.
It's a big leap, isn't it?
Personal branding is the way. That's our strategy, the way to go. So from the professional standpoint, the personal standpoint, how do you go about building your brand within a large organization? Because to a certain extent, you are now, the flip side is you are with this company now. You're under that brand, you're under that umbrella. So how do you then, build your own personal brand within that larger organization?
Okay, so let's maybe separate out if the company is all gung-ho on it and if they're not.
Okay.
Because I think there's a way you can do it either way, and I believe you should.
Okay.
So let's say the company's gung-ho and they're going to bring somebody in. Then I'd say participate in everything. Put your hand up for everything and make the most of that. I mean, I don't know who these mythical companies are these days. I hope they exist. And so see that as an opportunity. And the other thing I think, regardless of circumstance, to keep in mind when you're building your personal brand is it still is about the company brand. So it's about finding out who you are, what your values are, and then how those align with and amplify and support the company brand. So you have to, first and foremost, be lifting the company brand, but you can also be lifting your brand as well. I believe you can have both.
Okay.
Now you can't do yours at the expense of the company brand. That would be the consideration there. So it's an interesting exercise as well, because personal branding is all about figuring out who you are, what your purpose is, what your values are, what your vision for yourself is. And sometimes when people go through this exercise, they look at their life, their job, their relationships, and they find, oh, now that I've articulated this, maybe this doesn't align
maybe
so
not
well.
A good fit. Yeah.
So, I mean, not that I'm making this any less scary for companies, but you could have some people opting out.
Yeah.
But again, just like, the person has to recognize for themselves, I'm not for everyone. The company needs to recognize that as well.
Yeah.
If the company is not on board and they're not all about you building your personal brand, I guess you do. And I've been asked this, right, by some people where they've said, I'm being told to just conform, dress like everyone else, be like everyone else,
Right.
don't speak until spoken to, whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
And I was honest. I said, yeah, you have a choice to make. Is the potential promotion or your job security more important than being your whole self and feeling authentic?
Yeah.
That's your decision to make.
Yeah.
Or if you lean into who you are, can you attract opportunities and people that better align with that? And that is what I believe happens. So it might end up in a parting of ways. It may not.
Yeah.
And maybe the company will embrace some of the values you bring to the table if you start bringing them forward a little bit more. One of my own personal experiences ages ago when I started thinking about my own brand, I was going through some leadership programs and I started thinking about the values that I thought a leader should have. And I wrote compassion down there. And I thought, well, I didn't feel like I brought that to the table.
Okay.
Then I did a personal values exercise with someone and compassion came through strong as a personal value. And I had this epiphany moment realizing, oh, it is a value of mine. I just wasn't bringing it to work because I looked at other leaders and the way that they acted and I thought it didn't belong there.
Oh, okay.
But the minute I started leaning into my values and my brand,
Yeah.
opportunities and relationships started opening up for me that I had never anticipated would.
Yeah.
I stayed with that organization because I did find that it aligned. But the more I leaned into who I actually am, the better things got for me.
I spoke to an instructor at NATE, the college here, the trades college here in Edmonton. And he always gets questions from employers. How do I find good people? How do I find good? And his stance has now changed. You know, he's been there for a while, but it's always before it's like, oh, you just got to pay them better, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's trades. You just got to pay them better. But his stance has changed. He said, you build good people, like you build good culture by building good culture in your company. And that's how you get good people. And he's like, the reason why you can't find a lot of good people is because they're at a very good spot in whatever company they're working with. So it's that alignment to say, yeah, this person's values do align with my organization. So I want to stay here and I want to build my career here. And he finds a lot of employers, especially in the trades, have a hard time thinking that route because it's never done that way. Branding wasn't a huge thing for a lot of the small trades businesses. It was, you know, mom and pop owns it and it's hourly rate and it's who will pay you higher, will get you more money. And it's shifted. And I think a lot of trades students coming out are looking beyond just that hourly pay.
Yes.
And there's a huge component to, can you build your own brand within the company? Does your values align with that company? And you got to build that culture to go, you know, really find that good person.
Yeah. It's not just can you find good people, can you keep good people?
Yes.
Right. And that's by, you know, somebody was talking about how corporate brands are often are not authentic, right? They say this is how we are, but then they don't live it. And people feel that. So it's what, and then the person who says, how can I find good people? It's like, how are you showing up when you're trying to recruit people?
Right.
What's your brand?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they could care less about Joe's mechanic shop.
Yep.
Who's Joe?
Yes.
And what kind of person is he going to be like to work with?
Yeah. It's a big shift from a mindset perspective, especially for, you know, small businesses that I deal with. It's like they've never thought about that, right? Like you're right. Like Joe's mechanic was all about, can I fix your car? And how fast can I do it? Whereas, you know, I think the market's changed. It's like, you're right. Who is Joe? What's Joe's history? What's your story?
Mine actually, you know, when it's funny because it hits kind of home because my dad started out as a mechanic and he owned his own business ages ago when I was first born. But he built his business on his reputation, on the fact that he was an honest man who did good work and who cared about his community.
Yeah.
And then he took that personal brand into other parts of his career later on, and that stayed consistent. And that's why when he became a car salesperson, people would come to him, right? And it's you
Right.
carry that with you through your life and your career if you're intentional about your brand. Now, he didn't, I'm going to guarantee, I haven't asked him, but I'm going to guarantee he didn't think, what's my personal brand? Um, back in the early 80s. But I bet he thought, because he always talked to me about what kind of a person he wanted to be and how he wanted to show up in the world and what kind of an impact he wanted to make and how he wanted to be remembered. That's personal brand.
Yeah. Well, and I think back to, okay, like if we're on the topic of mechanics and cars, I think,
My dad's going to be so excited.
the big brand plays a part of it, right? So
Yeah.
let's say it's Toyota. So I know Toyota, I trust that brand. I know they make good quality cars. But kind of the next is, who have I been dealing with at that shop?
Yes.
And if it's that mechanic, then I'm going to get to know that mechanic. He's always or she's always the one fixing my vehicle, and you build that relationship, and then it becomes a much stronger bond. And wherever that mechanic goes, you're probably going to follow that mechanic. So
if you think of it as the dealership or the body shop, and we follow our mechanics around because we trust them, because they're good people.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's their personal brand. So I go back to your company already has your employees and their personal brand. It's just, are you harnessing that? Are you honing it? And is it the personal brand you want for your company?
Right.
So, do you have a no assholes policy? Because I've worked for workplaces where, we all knew this person needed to go, or they were making everybody's life miserable, they were disrespectful, or they weren't doing their work. And you look around, you're like, well, if we're willing to keep them, what are the values of the company?
Yeah.
And what gets rewarded around here? So it's thinking about culture, it's thinking about the brand of the company. If that's because again, whether you like it or not, that person is out there saying they're part of your company.
Yeah.
Is that the brand you want for your company? You cannot control it. You can harness it and hone it and put the right people in the right roles.
I think that's a good point. Not flipping. And I think that comes back to mindset is we're not going to control it because you can't. But how do we harness it? How do we leverage personal branding and the power of personal branding to, really build up, our team and have them run with it? I want to talk a bit about maybe some more of the technical aspects of personal branding. And one is obviously social media. Obviously plays a big role in personal branding. It always does. It does. And rightly or wrongly, you can go viral in social, but are there certain platforms, and this may probably be more depending on your profession, but from your experience, are there certain platforms that are better for personal brand building, or are there different strategies you'd have to take depending on what platform you go on?
Well, this social media is not my area of expertise. My business partner, it's her area of expertise, but she's taught me a few things. And from my own personal experience, to your point about going viral, it's amazing what will. So I think it was a year ago. So my parents built this 2-story house, and my grandmother can't manage stairs very well. So my dad made his own elevator, and it comes up through the floor, and then the floor opens up and it rises up. And so I thought this was the most hilarious thing. And so my grandmother, we call her Queen C because she's a queen. So I took a video of her coming up in the elevator and slowly, and then I set it to the song "Rise Up."
Oh, okay.
And I captioned it, my brilliant dad invented his own elevator so my grandmother could rise up through the floor like the queen that she is. And that thing went crazy viral.
100%. Yeah.
Just thousands and tens upon thousands of shares and views. And I was just taken aback. I've never had a post go viral like that again, but it was just amazing. Again, personal interest. It was just the fact that it was kind of funny, but also it was something personal, and I had never intended it. So it is important to be mindful about what you put out there on social media. But
what's interesting is imagine if your dad worked for like an elevator maintenance company or something, or like a
I could have been really intentional.
Residential, elevator.
And there were people that wanted to get in touch with him from this post.
Can he build me one of those, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, but similarly, some of on LinkedIn. So, when you're looking at platforms, regardless of what platform it is, it's telling the so what, not the what. What's meaningful about this? What's personal about it? And not oversharing personal details, but making it personal. We've all seen those posts when somebody leaves a job that are kind of pro forma, perfunctory that they put out on LinkedIn. I put one out recently that I put a lot of thought into, and that I put my whole heart into, because the job meant something to me and the people meant something to me. And I put it out, and I've been shocked about how far it's gone. Like, so far it's got over 9,000 impressions, which is more than any post I've ever put out on LinkedIn.
You are being your authentic self,
exactly.
Right? And it aligns with your personal brand.
Yeah. It was professional, but it was human.
Yeah.
And so that's the posts that get the most traction on any platform are the ones that have that human aspect, but that have the why or the so what, I guess. What's your why? Those are the ones that people care about, that link to them. In terms of which platforms, I guess it depends on who your audience is, and is your knowing who you want to reach and where they're going to be. I make decisions based on kind of what I can commit to and what I'm willing to learn.
It can be overwhelming.
So I'm not on TikTok. Although I keep getting told that, our business should be on TikTok, and I'll leave that to the professionals. I think the key, though, is whatever platform you're on or whatever you choose, you don't have to be on all of them. Whatever you pick, make sure that you can have a meaningful presence on it, and that you can be current and active on it. Whenever I see people request to follow, or I see accounts where they have no activity in like months or years, I'm like, well, what's the point in me following you? Because I can engage with your content. Yeah. And also, you just look like an internet creep that's just there to watch everybody else.
There's a lot of that happening, especially on LinkedIn lately.
So, be present, be current, and be real, be meaningful.
So that's great advice. And I think, applicable for anybody at wherever they're at in their, personal branding journey. Is there anything else for maybe someone just starting out, looking at taking on building their personal brand? Like what should they focus on aside from some of the things like the what, the why, the so what, and finding all that out? Is there anything else that someone just starting out that you would recommend that they focus on?
Yes. Well, two things. Going back to kind of the social media platforms, one thing I should have mentioned, and this is going to sound scary to some people and a little bit out there, but I do believe that there's value in most people having their own personal website. And that sounds like a lot of work. It's not.
Totally is. No, it's kidding.
It can be.
It can be fun, though.
And it doesn't have to be overcomplicated.
Yeah.
It's even better if it's not. If it's just one page. But the key to that is one platform where you can completely control your narrative, where you get to say whatever it is that you are about, and you can incorporate all the components of your brand. And it can also be a portfolio of work that you've done over the years. It can be a collection of things that you do outside of work. It's important to recognize that we are multifaceted. And some of these social media platforms are really limiting. For example, LinkedIn, I feel like the format is really restricting. It's become, you can play with it a little bit, but it really is just like an online resume.
Right.
And so how does it tell people who you are as a person? It's really hard to get that across in that way. If you're just starting out building your personal brand or thinking about your personal brand, it's super scary. I'm not going to lie. Because like I said, it's about the creepy, deep creep questions like, what is my purpose? What are my values? Right. What is my vision? Most of us have never asked ourselves those questions. And I would say, don't start by asking yourself those questions.
Okay.
There's a way to get there by thinking about different things. So how I actually started was I was trying to figure out what brought me joy and kind of who I was. And I started going through old photographs, and I would just set aside photographs that were moments where I felt joy or things that I felt were like influential to who I am. And I created almost like flashcards.
Okay.
Then I took those photos and I started writing about what was the story behind it, what was impactful about that. And as I started to pull those stories forward, I could see the common threads across them. Those are the themes that really spoke to my purpose, my origin story. There's these stories that we carry with us that we just kind of don't really think about, but we We remember them. We tell them often as funny anecdotes to people, but they're meaningful. That's why they stuck with us. It's about digging deeper and figuring out what that meaning is. And same thing with values exercises. Please, for the love of God, do not get a list of words and circle your values, because you're going to circle what you think you should have, and don't should all over yourself.
Right.
So when we do values exercises, we ask people, what gives you energy? And what sucks the life out of you?
Right.
And then we start to pull forward some of those common themes.
Yeah.
So it's about really just exploring what makes you tick, what makes you happy, what makes you mad, what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
And then the 7 whys are always a good thing.
7 whys.
Yep. So when you say something, it's usually going to be a bit of a surface level answer. And so then
keep digging down.
Have somebody ask you why 7 times, up to 7 times.
Right.
And then you get to the real core meaning. We did this recently live with someone, and she was brave for doing this in front of a group of 35 people. But it was impactful for people to see where we started out, because we have this narrative we tell ourselves about ourselves. And then when you dig deeper and dig deeper, then you get to the core of your why.
Yeah.
And that's what people connect with.
What about like introverts? Because I do get this now and then, where it's like, well, Chris, I'm not like you. I don't want to be out there. It's just not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they recognize, you know what, it is important for me to build my personal brand. But is there any difference in strategy and approach? If you have someone who's a bit more of an introvert and not quite ready to be all out there?
Well, I am going to plug our podcast.
Go for it.
Because we, on the Demythifying Brand podcast, for this season, I think 4 of our guests were self-professed introverts, but very successful public-facing people. So the first thing I would say as well is stop telling yourself that you can't do it because you're an introvert, that you're not like someone else. We talk about that as well. You don't know what that person's story is. So my partner on the podcast, she talked about how people perceive her as very extroverted and outgoing, and she is, but she was also terrified of public speaking. And it took years of her working herself up to speaking to big audiences, and still gets butterflies. I do a lot of public speaking, but I still practice for my cats and
in front of your cats.
Yeah, I do.
Do they respond?
Not in the best ways. Sometimes they just bathe themselves or fall asleep or walk away. But I do. Even the last week, I posted a photo on Instagram of my 2 cats. I said I'm practicing my content for the cats.
That's awesome.
But yeah, and I think about what I'm going to say, and I do get nervous. And so I think the first thing is be mindful of how you talk to yourself and about yourself and what you think about others. Everybody does get nervous. And even people who are, I would call myself an extreme extrovert, these things don't necessarily just happen, right? So, and then also give some grace. If you're an introvert, you don't have to get out there and give big speeches. When we say public speaking, I'm talking about speaking up in a meeting.
Yep.
I'm talking about, speaking, asking a question at a public event. Those are public speaking. Mm-hmm. Also, when you're introducing yourself to somebody at a networking event, that can be considered public speaking as well. Yeah. And those are skills we all need to have, regardless of whether we're introverted or extroverted.
Yeah.
And if being an introvert is part of core to who you are, then figure that out and incorporate that into your brand.
You can definitely leverage off that. Yeah, absolutely.
Because you never know who else is feeling that, or who else is going to resonate with your brand and who you are. And if it makes them feel seen or feel less alone, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the easiest name, right? Some people call it demystifying. I guess it works, but it's demythifying. I think we made up a word.
But I like that. Mythifying. No, it makes sense.
And there's a reason, because when we thought about doing a podcast about personal brand, for us, it had to start with breaking down the myths that people have about personal brand and that we've all been told over the years. We've all received messages from people and from systems and society about ourselves and about personal brand that we've internalized. And so before we can even start, I think we have to just call out the bullshit
Yep.
and unlearn those things. So there's myths. We've even talked about some of them today, right? The myth of, well, your personal brand is a logo or a website or a social media account. Another myth is your only companies need brands, not people.
Right.
And another myth is, this is one of my personal favorites, that focusing on your personal brand means you're a selfish attention seeker. That one hits me right in the feels.
We'll take that one with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely check out your podcasts. Sounds like you're going to have a lot of interesting conversations about around the topic. Now, before we end off, I started adding this in for the season with my guests, and I didn't ask you this ahead of time, so this is on the spot.
Okay.
The reason why we name our company Converse, and so like we have, aside from the media company, we also have an accounting firm called Converse. One of the things that we really believe in is that having conversations and open and authentic conversations, how we progress and move things forward. If you had an opportunity to have a conversation with anybody in the world, they could be dead or alive or fictional character, who would it be?
I was going to say something else, but actually, I would say, this maybe speaks a lot to my personality, my younger self. I lately have been reflecting a lot on, like I was saying, some of these messages from the past and things that I've gone through. And I've been writing letters to my younger selves. And I would just love to have that conversation. I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah.
But I just think it would be a really interesting conversation to explore what she was feeling along the way.
I was just going to say, aside from, giving her the winning lottery numbers for the $50 million jackpot, you would just have, just chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just be interested in where she was. The closest I come is actually my niece. I love,
nice.
Yeah, she's 14. And so that would be, I think, my person alive, who I'd love to have dinner and a conversation with, because she's so far ahead of where I was at that age. It's incredible. And it's just amazing. Actually, less than a month ago, she told me that she did a speech in school, and the topic she chose was how failure is better than not trying.
Oh, nice.
I was like, wow. So she just comes out with some amazing things. And
I don't even think that's like so far ahead when I think about my younger self.
I think all I thought about at that age was Backstreet Boys. I don't know. And then I'm gonna cheat, and then the other person, it's kind of like generations, be my great grandmother, because she was such a force. She moved out west, didn't speak any English, we're French, and she was always so spicy. And so our sign off for the podcast is stay spicy. And honestly, nice. I think about her every time, and I just would love to see what she thinks now.
Yeah. Her perspectives on the world.
Yeah.
Would be very interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, again, this is cheating, but I feel like all three generations would be a really cool conversation.
That's awesome. Lynette, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Podcast. We're going to have you back. There's so much you and I can talk about.
Yeah, and I mean, if I can swear, I'll be here.
Done deal. Oh, by the way, I want to shout out to the mugs that you're going to make.
Spicy mugs.
We're going to get some spicy mugs from Lynette, and we'll definitely do some posting on that. But
if you follow Demythifying Brand on Instagram or LinkedIn, we've started doing Mugshot Mondays.
Nice.
So we want people to show us your mugs and post your spicy mugs, because we love mugs that say spicy things on them, and we're going to launch some of our own. So on whatever podcast platform you're listening to, or if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Every little bit helps. Take care, and we will catch you in the next episode.